So, my favorite author, one of my favorite reads. This is the stopping point. Let's jump right into the starting point, shall we? Okay. See where I marked it at. I guess. Okay, he knows that it was a mistake of how they both acted toward each other, and while he feels protective of her, like he said, they knew that there was same grief, and he'd known her since she was a child, grappling with it. But the problem was he wasn't confused about the fact that she was a woman, because he did see her as a business partner, because they worked together day in and day out, because he watched her grow from child to an adolescent, into a smart but teenager, into a strong woman, because he didn't doubt for one moment that she was the kind of maturity and passion to burn them both to the ground. But she was avoiding it. That he was right about. There was one reason she was fixating on doing things for Iris, on worrying about his loneliness, determinedly not seeing that Elliot so clearly had a crush on her, and redirecting it all towards Iris. She didn't want to see any of this, didn't want to hear any of it. Him forcing it on her was... She was denying it for all a reason, and hell if he knew what it was. He wasn't the person to try and figure it out either. He was his own mess. He gritted his teeth, making sure that in the forge was very well handled before pushing open the door and greeting the cold air like an old friend. "Well," came an all too familiar voice behind him, "you look angry." He turned and saw Sammy standing there, her pregnant round belly and her eyes far too knowing it was easy to see even in the darkness. "What the hell are you doing here?" "We were doing Christmas decorating. I came to see if you were committed to your yearly avoidance, and to see how you're doing, because I know you hate this time of year." "Just working." "Okay, you seem ticked off." "Christmas," he growled, "and I'm roped into this whole parade thing. I'd rather not deal with it. You know that." "Right." Sammy let out a slow breath. "And it has nothing to do with why Rose came in the house looking like the hounds of hells were on her heels. And why she has soot on her face." He gritted his teeth and looked square at his friend. "Are you accusing me of something?" "Just a suspicion, one that's been growing for a while. I haven't touched her," he said, the lie tasting like grit on his tongue. "I mean, not like you're implying. But there's something there. It doesn't matter, Sammy. She's a kid." "I don't think you mean that, Logan, because while all of us fall into treating her like a baby around here, you never do." "You know what I mean." "You mean that you think you're not right for her, and that my husband would kick your butt." "That," he confirmed. 98, 99. Here comes 100. "I can't keep secrets from him," Sammy said. Her voice was soft, a little regretful, because he knew if Sammy would keep a secret for anyone, it would probably be him, but never from Ryder. "There's not a secret to tell, I swear that." A look of understanding dawned on her face. "That's why you were sitting out on the porch that night when I left Ryder's bedroom. I told you I was thinking about everything I shouldn't do." He took a sharp breath, and then the air was cutting into his lungs. "And I know what the hell I can't do. Don't worry." She didn't say anything for a moment. She looked up at the stars like she was trying to choose the right words. "Good," she said. "I love you, Logan. I really do. I like you as a brother, and I want you happy, and I want Rose to be happy." "You don't think that I'll make her happy." He shook his head. "Neither do I. And if I did, it's different for us. It's different for us because we're not part of them." "I know that. I mean, you are now." She looked away. Don't feel that bad about that. I'm just not insulting you or trying to be mean. Look, I'm not that kind of guy who falls in love. I'm around her a lot. I feel some things, but I'm a man enough to know what it is. And I'm man enough not to act on lust. And she and I had a little fight. It got out of hand. But hell, you know Rose. She can take care of herself." He tried to laugh. "She threw a soda can at me." "I do know she can take care of herself. You don't need to come out here and play Mama Bear." She sighed heavily. "The problem is, I feel like a Mama Bear to both of you." "You don't have to. And I know what I am. I know that what I can do and what I shouldn't do." Sammy was silent for a long moment. "Yeah, I know those things too about myself too, but now here I am." He couldn't tell if Sammy was arguing for or against, and he had a feeling that she didn't know either, because they'd gone all over this when she and Ryder's relationship had changed from friendship or more. The drawbacks. The risk. And in the end, for her, it had worked. So he could see why she felt torn, afraid of him and Rose crossing a line that would destroy what they built, also afraid she was telling them to turn away from love. But that was all fine and good for her and Ryder, not him. He was different. He was scared. Broken. Rose wouldn't heal that, and he would just break her too. "Not everything ends the way it did for you two," he said. It could for you if you wanted it to, with someone who's not Rose, though, right? She's so young, and it isn't that I don't think you're great. You can't say anything to me that I haven't already said to myself. Did you think that I wanted to wake up one day attracted to Ryder's sister? I didn't. I agree with every reason you have that it's not going to happen with her. I know, but that doesn't mean that it can't happen with someone. You're confusing a few things. The fact that I think she's hot doesn't mean that I want anything else. That's the issue. She looked at him skeptically. 100, 101. I don't think I told you that was 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, and 3. Don't do that, he said. Don't psychoanalyze me. I don't need your hippy-dippy feelings crap. Fine, she said, but Logan, there is someone out there for you. I know it. He knew that she believed it. She believed that because she was able to heal from her wounds of the past, because Ryder had been able to heal from the wounds in his. That it meant they all could. Him too. But she didn't know, not really. She didn't understand. He had the kind of guilt that dogged a man like a demon straight out of double hockey sticks. The kind of stuff that you didn't want to bother a partner with, the kind of stuff you didn't heal from. He didn't want to see Ryder and Sammy slaves to the pain that they'd gone through, and he knew that Sammy thought it was the same with him, that same kind of pain. It wasn't. It couldn't be. His mom had been the most important person in his life. She'd chosen to have him, to raise him, to make him the center of her world, and when he made the center of his right back, and they had all they ever wanted was to protect her. He didn't give a damn about his biological father, and he ignored his existence, the existence of the half-brother, half-sister, no matter what changed. No matter how close they got, he refused to acknowledge the connection because of the pain the man caused his mom. And Logan. All he wanted was to give back to her. He saved and saved for the best Christmas present he could think of. The memory made his stomach turn sour. No, there was no place for moving on, not for him. Thanks for checking in. I'm just going to go back up to the cabin. All right, she said, but you can't avoid Christmas forever. I damn well can. No, Sammy said gravely, you can't. I'm fruitful and round with life, and I'm creating it, which has made me gloriously filled with nesting instincts, and I want nothing more than to bedeck every hall with a bow of holly, and you will not escape, Logan Heath. Watch me, he said, turning away from her. But even in the middle of all his irritation, in the middle of this insanity with Rose, he felt remarkably grateful for Sammy. She was the one person who came close to knowing how he felt about anything. And yeah, she was precariously close to some home truths that lived inside him, and precariously close to a man who would cheerfully snap him in half if he found the kinds of things he thought about his sister. But still, all the things considered, it was good that he still talked to Sammy, and put it in perspective. Because Sammy thought he was bad for Rose. Sammy was a romantic, she was an optimist, and she certainly saw better in him than he did. If she couldn't even see a way for the two of them to have something, then the possibility simply didn't exist. If she couldn't even... Okay, we read that part. It wasn't just a road to nowhere, it was a road it wasn't a road at all. And double hockey sticks, he busted on through some brush tonight, forged a path where they shouldn't have been one, and forced to recognize something that he shouldn't have, but it didn't matter. He would get it together, and he would deal with himself. 102, 103, here's 104, 105, 106. It was going to have to start with not caring so much about the whole situation with Elliot, Iris, and Rose. It was a mistake that she was going to have to make. He didn't want to be there when she fell. Didn't need to be the one to pick her up. In fact, he desperately needed not to be that man. She didn't want him to be. That should be enough, and it had to be. Rose was still feeling a little peevish the next day. She was up early the next morning as her routine, but Iris was up much earlier than usual and irritated at Rose, who wanted to sit in silence and marinate in her feelings. Elliot heard about your performance at the town meeting, Iris said prosaically. And how do you know all that? Rose asked, suddenly much more interested in the interaction. He texted me, Iris said. Iris looked a little pleased, and that made Rose feel good, though it was something about the way her moral failings, as they all seemed to see, it didn't make her feel good. Well, I'm a little bit sorry that it's the town gossip, but that's it. Rose, I thought you'd at least feel a little bad about it. No, Rose said, stubborn. I'm not the one who should feel bad. She's sad, Rose. You can't find any pity for her? Badly done, Rose. And that's when the inconvenient memory of last night crashed into her brain, along with the vision of every very angry blue eyes. What would Iris think if she knew about that? Then he touched her, backed her up against the wall. That he had touched her. He touched her face. With his thumb, you're the one that has turned the thumb into some kind of symbolic object. She's thinking. She cleared her throat. Anyway, I just want coffee, not a lecture. You're unrepentant, Iris said. Well, so is she, about everything. She thought back to Logan's words, to what he said about her being less fortunate in some ways than Rose was. Was that true? With some of her anger moaned down, and easier to see his words more clearly, than annoyed her, because she was annoyed at him, and she didn't want to see this point. She'd been able to admit that he was right about some things last night, but the feeling hadn't come with any real clarity or introspection, but here it was. She tended to think that no one was a whole lot less fortunate than the group of them. They had lost their parents after all. She was loved, but for the first time she wondered if anybody actually loved Barbara. What? Iris said. Nothing, she said. It's just that now I'm thinking of that Logan might be right. His name tasted funny on her tongue. What had been familiar only yesterday now seemed foreign. Well, Iris said, that's something. Why are you so worried about it? She huffed. Well, as a singular object of pity in a small town, maybe I feel badly for her. You are not Barbara. Sure. 104, 105. Here comes 106, 107. Anyway, Elliot is crazy about you. Iris twitched her lips slightly. I'm not so sure that I would go so far to interpret a few texts as crazy about me. You need to have more confidence in yourself, Rose said. But her mind was halfway occupied on all the things Logan had said to her last night. It made her wonder if she had slightly too much confidence in herself. I don't know what I should have, Iris said. This is the closest I've ever come to dating someone, okay? Her sister's cheeks went pink. It doesn't feel like I thought it would, and I'm trying to process all of it, so, anyway, eat your breakfast. Rose obliged because she was starving. She would have normally felt a little bit more satisfied over Iris's admission that she felt something for Elliot, but she was consumed by the unease over her present situation, which made her feel guilty. This was all supposed to be about Iris, and somehow things were spinning and twisting inside of her and making her... She pushed her thoughts away and collapsed a couple of old mugs and took the old blue and white metal kettle out of the pantry, pouring coffee from the carafe into it. Then she went to the living room and took her coat and hat off the peg door and stepped into her boots and slipped outside. It was freezing. Early in the morning the sun had yet to rise, and the chill was in the air, spoke of frost, impending snow. She supposed, given that it was into December now, that it was normal, but the first bite of freeze in the winter always took her a little bit off guard. Changing seasons brought with a wave of nostalgia that she always fought to keep in her mind in the present as she raised her shoulders up to the ears and trudged toward the barn. But mornings like this lived in her memory. Weather did, for Rose, the experience of her boot hitting the porch, the first taste of the season's air on her tongue, and peel back the years one by one, and this morning was no different. She could remember a few years ago when she had come out on a morning like this and had gone into the barn helping Logan with a cow of distress. A few years before that, when she was just decided to work on the ranch, was going to be on her vocation, she had stuck out, bright-eyed and eager, completely injured to the cold, her excitement providing a layer of warmth. That time she'd been 15, and she'd come out early before the school to chatter at Logan while he mucked the stalls, and he flung a shovelful of dry shavings at her, and she retaliated, which had sent her off to school with debris in her hair, but it had been so funny she didn't care. She stopped, and she knew it wasn't the cold air that had suddenly taken her breath away. She remembered walking down those steps holding two metal camping mugs in her hands, her mom beside her and a full kettle of the stovetop coffee. It's cold out this morning, Rose could remember clearly looking up at her mom, seeing her smile. Her dark hair had been loose, flowing in the early morning breeze. They're going to need coffee. Good thing we're here to bring it to 'em. Her fingers tightened around the kettle mugs she was carrying now. She had so few memories like that, and she tried not to let them surface, because when they did, the grief sliced so sharp and hard that she couldn't breathe. That was 106, 107. Here comes 108, 109. The barn door slid open, a loud sound grating in the silence of the winter dawn. There was Logan, standing backlit by the light inside, a warm glow around his muscular frame. You all right? Yeah, she said, blinking hard. Except out here were the memories that she didn't want, and in there was him. Neither one seemed particularly safe at the moment. This time of year, he said, his rough voice. She nodded, unwillingly to say anything or show emotion that might make him do something. She didn't know what he might do. Yesterday he was transforming himself into a particularly scary stranger. Certainly not the guy who had laughed and flung shavings at her when she had been 15. She didn't know which Logan she was going to get this morning. Then he smiled. Good, let's go. We have to move the cows from one side of the ranch to the other. We got to get them up the creek down the lower pasture. It's freezing, she muttered. I know, but when you signed on for the life of glamour, that is the being a rancher, you signed up for this. A life of glamour, she repeated. He jerked his head back toward the barn and trudged toward him. It was the weirdest thing. When she moved past him, she could feel the hair on her arms standing on end because of his sleeve. The sleeves of her coat could feel prickling in the back of her neck. She hadn't ever been that close to him, hadn't touched her. And it was just a strange awareness that settled over her like another layer. She wasn't quite as cold anymore. Got your horse ready for you. He went into the stall and led the horse Raisin out to her, all tacked up, and she frowned. Thank you. That was surprising, but then maybe he'd gotten out of bed earlier than she did. I have coffee, she said. Well, I can stop for a quick cup, but then we need to move on. We're going to be battling daylight today. Sundown is at 5. Sun up hasn't even happened yet, she said. She poured some coffee into a cup and handed it to him. He smiled, and then she felt like again she was back in the barn nearly 20 years ago, helping her mom bring coffee to her dad and uncle. Is something wrong, he asked, his blue gaze far too sharp. She lifted a shoulder and offered him nothing. She wasn't the one who made it weird. He owed her an explanation. She didn't owe him anything. She waited to see if he would ask if he had anything to do with what happened between them last night. It didn't. Except it was definitely a part of why she felt weird this morning. She knew, she was sure of that, but she wasn't going to bring it up. She refused. It was up to him. He was the one who had. She remembered that back. She had remembered that. She picked up a soda can and thrown it back at his back. Page 110 and 111. Okay, she acted like a little bit strange, and he had escalated it, but he was the one who had touched her, and that was the reason why her skin felt particularly prickly this morning, so she felt like it was up to him to address that. Instead, he took a sip of his coffee while patting the horse on the rump. That gesture felt pointed, particularly when his electric blue eyes met hers, was likely her problem, or maybe it wasn't. But either way, he didn't seem to be in a hurry to discuss any of it. As they finished their coffee, mounted their horses, and headed up toward the creek, Rose kept her eyes on the broad shoulders and back. He was a brilliant horseman. She always admired the way he worked with animals. Today, though, the way that she looked at his movements, his body felt different. When he angled the horse, she noticed the way his hands gripped the reins. She knew how rough they were now because he touched her face, her neck, the collarbone. Yes, she had to catalog specifically every part that he had put his hands on. It seemed important. They were strong, too, the way they guided the horses with every movement, as they spoke of not his strength, but his connection with the animal. You're awfully quiet, he said. This is page 111. I'm not quiet, but the feeling of speaking was a little bit foreign because she barely spoken 20 words in his presence, and she realized how ridiculous her objection was as soon as she made it. What are you thinking about? My parents. She went back to the earlier truth, not the present one. A strange thing that it was easier to admit that she was twisted up inside over what had happened the night before. Either admission wouldn't have been true, but contrary to every moment in her life, talking about her parents felt preferable than talking about other things that she was thinking of. He understood, though. Okay, we're on 112 and 113. Somehow, in all the confusion between them, they still had that. What's got you thinking about them? It's silly. I just remembered. This morning, I remembered my mom and I was bringing coffee to my dad, and I'd forgotten we used to do that. It's weird because I brought the same coffee cups, the same kettle outside 100 times. I haven't thought of that, but this morning I did. I don't know. It's not silly, he said. Memories for me are really few and far between. I was just a kid when they died. Yeah, but you know. They all said that you had the formative years stuff, and it was really important. So it doesn't matter that it wasn't very many or that you were young. It mattered. It was important. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking about it today. Something shifted inside of her, a companion to shifting that had occurred yesterday, the answer to the question she wasn't asking. Why was she thinking of it? Because of the shifting, because of the changing. She gritted her teeth, grateful that Logan wasn't looking at her, grateful that he couldn't see this shifting. Do you remember my mom? The question that was asked was a rough voice that made her heart twist. He never talked about his mother, not specifically. They all carried a shared grief. They didn't have to talk about it. He didn't share memories, and when Christmas came around, he retreated into himself, and he offered no explanations. No one ever pushed, but she always suspected, always known, that something about this time of year cut sharper and hit harder for him. She attributed it to the Christmas memories being different than theirs. They were missing their parents at Christmas, it was true, but Christmas had been the same in the house with their siblings, and that so remained. Logan's Christmases had been in another house with his only mother, and maybe for him Christmas without her was so removed from Christmas with her he could never have enough joy to balance out the grief. But he never offered, and she never asked. She didn't know why he was offering it now. "Yes," she said slowly. Logan's mom had a sandy blonde hair, green eyes, and an easy smile and soft voice. Rose remembered because it was so easy to tell the difference between the mother, who had the low, loud tone and robust laugh that echoed throughout the house, and Jane Heath, whose voice was a whisper with a song in it, whose laugh had a quiet burr in it. She was sweet, Rose said, and I remember that she had made cookies. There was this kind of thing when you guys would come out over for dinner, she always bring cookies. Yeah, he said she did. The roughest voice scraped in her against her heart. His shoulders moved up and down, a heavy breathing causing the motion. Maybe if he had something of his mother at Christmas, it would make it different for him. Those cookies, she always made cookies at Christmas. "Do you have the recipe for her cookies?" she asked. "Maybe," he said. "I have quite a lot of her things that I haven't really. I had put it all in storage except for a few pictures and knickknacks, those I have in the house. But you know I moved in with you and all after she died, and there was really nowhere to put her things. We rented the house, so it's all in boxes, one of the barns. I never really wanted to go through it. We should see if we can find them, you know. It's not so I can cook them, but maybe I bet Iris or Sammy would do a good job." He was silent for a long time. That seems wrong somehow. "Why?" "I don't know." He said just that. "She's gone, so it seems fair enough that I don't get to have her cookies ever again." Her heart twisted. She saw him more clearly in that moment, and it hurt. 112, 113, we're on 114 and 15. Well, it won't be the same, she pointed out. It's just that it might make it feel like a little bit closer to her. How could that be a bad thing? Seems like something she would have liked. That was another thing she remembered, that Logan's mom had loved him, that she'd been proud of him, so proud it was obvious even to a little kid, but she understood even then that he had a very special bond with his mother, and she and her mom and dad even had her. "Logan," she said slowly, that must have destroyed you to lose her. I'm sorry about what I said last night." It didn't matter now that he hadn't been the one to bring it up. It didn't matter that what she'd said to him had been unforgivably cruel. She had been cruel the last 24 hours, and she didn't like it. As if her personal pain meant she had somehow given a pass for being mean to other people. She didn't know why she was being like that, except that all her heart was a mess for the past few months, all that change, all the moving on. But it was an excuse. "It doesn't matter," he said. "It does. I never should have taken something like that, and that you do understand. You understand exactly what I've been going through, even more and different because the two of you, because she was your whole family. You lost your whole family." She felt tears pushing against her eyes and blinked them back. She didn't cry. She certainly didn't deserve to cry now, and she hurt Logan. She couldn't make it about her own pain. To take something that personal to both of us and just use it because I was mad was borderline unforgivable. "We've known each other far too long to be doing unforgivable things to each other," Logan said. "I think it's all forgivable at this point. Don't worry about it." So we're going to read right down to the bottom of the next page on 116. Okay, when they arrived at the pasture, the cows were milling about. The sun was coming up over the mountains, then it was time to work. It was a small group of cattle, so it didn't take whole lot to maneuver to drive them a quarter of the way across the ranch, but it did burn off the cold. What it didn't do was distract her enough to make her quit looking at Logan. It was like driving by the scene of a car accident, knowing that you shouldn't indulge yourself, the very worst part, and look up the potential horror and tragedy, but curious to stop yourself. That part kept looking at him, to see if there was anything different to watch him drive cattle now than it had been before last night. But it was different. When he eased that horse into a gallop, urging him along as he dogged those cows, keeping them in formation, the way his strong thighs held him in the saddle, the way every muscle in his body worked together as one, it was just captivating and annoying as hell out of her. and he wasn't going to say anything, not about any of it. She felt bad, genuinely awful, for some of what she had done yesterday, but he touched her and changed something, and he was acting like he hadn't. When they finished, she was sweaty underneath her coat, and her face was freezing cold. They dismounted. Logan let out a breath. She could see it in the air. It's just not warming up today, he said. Fine by me, she said, defiantly, wiping her runny nose and refusing to behave any differently just because everything inside her felt differently. You look grumpy, Rosie, he said. That caused her to scowl deeply. I am not grumpy. You look grumpy. Well, you don't know everything, Logan, not even a little bit. I think you need to go get some lunch so that you quit being such a crab. I always love their banter back and forth. It's adorable. Okay, we're going to start on 138. She just felt the same and change all at once. She didn't know how those two things went together, but they did, because Rose herself was in the exact same place she'd been a week ago. She felt entirely different. Nothing had changed, and it was change in her that made her feel painfully aware that made her feel so unsatisfied, so sad. She didn't like it. She avoided thinking about herself and what she wanted and what she didn't have. But she wanted to talk to Logan about it, and she couldn't, because that kiss had not only taken peace of mind, it had taken her confidence with that kiss too, and it had taken a lot of things from her. She just couldn't talk to Sammy, she couldn't talk to Iris, she couldn't pretend that there was nothing to be curious about, all the things that they never even explored. Couldn't pretend that she was just waiting around until she found a man to be attracted to. There was one, but he frightened her, or at least that might have happened if he frightened her. Talking to Pansy hadn't gotten any closer to a decision. She pushed herself out of the chair and walked back to the station, meandered outside, and walked down the street sidewalk, making her way toward the main street. The red brick buildings were festooned with Christmas decoration, dark green bows wrapped with support beams and balcony railings, while the Christmas lights draped over everything. Red ribbons around the wreaths hung on the doors, and big trees already set up in place awaiting the parade and the Christmas tree lighting that would happen afterward. There was a familiarity to it, and usually that gave her a sense of comfort, but not today. Today it made her ache, because it was another thing that was the same, while inside her the things were made up who she was felt entirely different. It was like the town was trying to goad her, a resolute monument to the fact that while she might feel different, she wouldn't be brave enough to do different. She would come back to the parade on Saturday. She would do her demonstration with Logan. They would pretend nothing ever happened, except it would be the same. And maybe someday she would coordinate the parade. She would be Barbara Niedermeyer, bitter and angry, demanding that things stay the same, because the sameness of this town make her feel not so ashamed of the sameness in herself. And a young, impetuous person might call her out for being so inflexible, and that person would get told off because Rose was an object of pity, and everyone should know and respect her. That cut Rose back down to inside her heart. That she might have been the one who hurt Barbara, maybe. That her words might have caused pain when she wasn't. Better she gone around recklessly causing harm whenever it came from. Why did she think she was better than Barbara? She thought she might be on the same path any day and any way. 138, 139, here comes 140 and 141. The future was bleak, and right now it felt very possibility that the alternative was possibly up in the life that she knew and the life that she loved. Rose already knew the life didn't come with guarantees. She already knew that there was no safety, and no guarantee it would all work out in the end, because she lost her parents, the source of all the security she felt as a child. She already knew that sometimes in life a change, an event, was heavy enough to ruin everything, and that sometimes things couldn't be fixed or repaired, that some things were permanent, and that's just the way it was. Even seeing the future as grim as it might be, Rose felt like she might be too afraid to do anything about it, because at least the future was one she could see. A future that stretched past kissing Logan again. She couldn't see that. She didn't want to know what might happen. She didn't know who she would be on the other side. That frightened her. She stopped on the street, and a troop of carolers wearing Victorian dresses exited the kitchen store, singing a song about silver bells. Right in a frigid wind picked up and wrapped itself around Rose. She stood there while with the music filtered around her, the wind chilled her to the bone. She had to look at herself the way those carolers might see her, pale and large-eyed and frozen in the tracks. Not a tough cowgirl, not a bold, bright force who tried to bring cheer and goodness to the people around her. But a frightened animal ready to race back into her burrow at the first sign of trouble. A woman who got overly involved in the lives of other people around her so that she didn't have to deal with her own. A girl who felt tender and bruised because she feared that she might have a crush on a man who had the power to devastate her. But the carolers weren't looking at her, they were just singing. The town rolled on as it always had. It only had Rose who felt changed, and there was no one who could help her with the decision she needed to make about what she was going to do next, because nobody else would ever understand what she was feeling now. It was a choice she had to make for herself, to run away, to be afraid, or to be new. She was afraid she didn't have the courage to be new. That was 140, 141. And the last page in this book for tonight, page 166, short paragraph. Everything feels a little messed up right now, and I don't know if it's everyone pairing off or if it's Christmas or kissing you. Maybe it's everything, but I thought I knew what you said about me and why I was meddling in everyone else's business and not my own. It's because I don't like thinking about my own feelings. And she's talking to Logan. And we're stopping right there for tonight. Look at how much we have left to go. Not that much. And that's pretty awesome. I hope to finish this book with you tomorrow. It's been a wonderful book, and it's going to get an outstanding rating. There's so many good parts I'm not reading to you all that I want you to read the book. There's this little part in here that I had originally marked it. And I don't think I'm going to share it. I may not, but there's an accident in the book, and it drives Rose to realize really hard. I think it's more towards the end of the book. I might still not have it marked. I don't know. It drives Rose to realize that life is short, and while she's scared, at the same time she's in love with him. So you got to stay tuned for that. There's a tease for you to make you tune in tomorrow for The Last Christmas Cowboy by Maisey Yates. More moments. Great book, great book. Next up is Happily Incorporated, and yes, I have it marked off too.